That was awesome. That was awesome. Yeah.
It wasn't very packed. It was a nice warm-up.
Yeah.
Do you read the play?
Oh, no, it was 3 acts.
All about. Yeah. Yeah, back to that.
Kia ora koutou, everyone.
Hi.
Welcome to Fear Factor.
Woo.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, that's the enthusiasm we need in the room. This is great.
We're standing like this because we're going to do a dramatic reveal of the panelists.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Okay,
Okay, good.
so-
This is already planned out. This is great. We're
My
good.
name's Eliana Gray.
I'm-
This is my great friend Jordan Hamel.
Yeah, we're off to a great start already. This is
Yeah.
good. Yeah.
We've got a couple things that we'd like to tell you before we start the event. We're going to tell you, I'm going to tell you a couple housekeeping things.
Yeah.
One, obviously, we're in like a bar/cafe. There's food and drinks over there. Feel free to live your dreams. You can get up at any point you want. Also, another very important thing to say, I know that this is like a Fear Factor event, and so maybe things will get a little bit scary. We don't really know where things are going to go yet. We kind of have like a vague idea, but we're just like sort of rolling with the punches. So I don't think it's going to get too dark, but if at any point you feel the need to protect yourself and take yourself out of the room, just do it. Like, that's just, I don't have any specific content warnings for like what we're going to be talking about because I don't really know, but just know that nobody's judging you. This is like a full no shame place, no shame, no fear, or maybe fear, but like only fear that then will like wither by the end of the evening. But yeah, so don't feel embarrassed. You can do whatever you want. That same goes for like going to the bathroom and like getting a libation. Jordan, do you want to tell us like what we're doing?
Yeah, sure. So we've got 3 lovely panelists hidden behind us right now who will... What?
1, 2, 3, go. Bum, bum, bum.
Okay. Our panelists. Give them a round of applause. Look at these amazing people. Yeah, no context reveal. It's great. It's good. So what we're going to do is we're going to go around. We're going to meet these amazing people, including us, because we're also amazing people. You're going to hear
pretty cool.
a little bit about who they are, what they're doing, about their creative journeys. They might share something with you, maybe some writing, maybe some performance.
Well, they're definitely going to share some writing
Yeah,
with
they
you.
have
We
to.
made them.
Yeah, we're paying them to do it, so
Yeah.
they're better. And then after that, we're going to have a chat about fear, about writing, about creating, about anxiety, about all the stuff, all the things.
So many emotions.
So
And
many
then save
emotions.
Time. We're going to have a little Q&A at the end. So
Yeah, we need
like,
questions.
No pressure, but if you don't say like the most amazing question ever, it's going to be super embarrassing. No, that's a lie. That's terrible for a fear thing. No questions are dumb.
Yeah.
There's no stupid questions.
My goal is that we make the audience like super anxious and fearful by the end of this, and that they're stressed out. Like, we want to make them as uncomfortable as possible. So
That was the goal.
that was the
right?
goal, exactly. Yeah. So
yeah.
we're going to be just fine. I think we're
We're
going
all
to be
on the
fine.
same page.
Yeah.
But in all seriousness, I do want to talk a little bit about why we wanted to do this event.
Yeah.
And I think that something that was so important for me in thinking about putting this event together was kind of thinking about events that I really wanted in my life. I mean, now also, because I'm scared like all the time. Got very huge anxiety problems. But events that I would have really wanted to go to when I was sort of just starting out and the kind of person that was like, I really want to be a writer, but like I have no idea what I'm doing and I don't know how, and all information feels really inaccessible and everything's terrifying. And so I kind of wanted to create an event for me at that stage, which was like really not that long ago. And Jordan is amazing and also wanted that. And then we were like, hey, let's do it together. But so basically what we were kind of thinking, right, is that like fear operates best in the darkness and the shadow. That's kind of where it blooms, and it sort of blooms in the vagueness in our minds, and then we let it sort of have control over us. So today we want to be kind of like exploring some concepts around that, like what the fuck is fear? Do we need it? Like, should we keep it with us? Should we get rid of it? Find out at the end.
Yeah. Did you have that like prepared? Because that was amazing.
No,
was
it was
that just
totally
off the
off the
cuff?
cuff.
Oh shit, that was
Yeah.
awesome. Okay.
We're also going to be learning how to do impromptu emceeing tonight.
Yeah, it's
if
great.
we have time.
Yeah.
But so now what we're going to do, okay, I'm just going to keep talking. Jordan, you can sit down. That concludes the start of our evening. We've got a very close relationship. It's fine. We're going to start the performance part of the evening, and because I'm just really selfless, I'm going to start. And so I guess I want to kind of give a little bit of context to why I chose to perform this piece tonight. The brief for all of our...
Tell us who you are.
Babes.
Tell us who you are.
I'm going to
yourself.
tell us who I am afterwards.
Okay.
You're going to get to learn who I am through the poem, and then afterwards, after you make all your assumptions, I'm going to break them by introducing myself. But firstly, the brief for all of our amazing performers today was to pick a piece that was kind of about fear. And that could be, because we're like creatives and poets, we could do it however tangentially we wanted to. But for me, this poem is about fear because when I first wrote it, it's about, not to like give the game away, but it's about how I sometimes feel that I would be like closer to my parents if they were dead. Which... Yeah, as soon as I wrote that, I was like, wow, that's really fucked up, Ellie, and that's a dark, ugly emotion, and you should never share that with anyone ever, because they'll think you're a psychopath and, like, put you away for, like, the thought of murder. I don't know what that is. That's not manslaughter. Like, something, something bad would happen. So I had some big fear around it. And so it took me sending it to, like, a couple trusted friends, being like, hey, I wrote this thing that's really fucked up. I don't know if you want to read it, but, like, maybe could you please read it, because, like, I feel really fucked up about this right now. And then they did that, and they said it was okay, but you can't always trust people. So then I just decided to throw caution to the wind and read it one night up in Auckland. And the thing that was most amazing to me about that experience is that I was obviously about to poop my pants, which is one of my reactions to anxiety. It's a fun fact about me. Get like really awesome anxiety diarrhea. It's totally cool. This is a safe space, right? But after I read the poem, I had at least 5 people come up to me and say, hey, I really related to that, or I totally feel you, or, I get what you're talking about. And I didn't sort of explain the poem, I just sort of launched into it. And I guess to me that's one of the most important things about art, is the fact that it can be a way for us to express all the things about ourselves that we feel alone and horrendous about. And then once we share them, we sort of find out that everybody is just as feeling like alone and gross as us. So with that, let's talk about how I wish my parents were dead. But actually not really, because I love my parents and I don't want to put that into the ether. So they're very much alive and will stay that way for a long time. Family reunions. What if I told you I wanted my parents to die? Not all of them. Just one would be fine. And I don't mean dead in the way that they've died. I mean dead in the way that softens the edges, draws us close to the fire of memory, throws all shadows against the wall to be forgotten, blaze us all in the glory in his love. I mean dead in the way that we get closer to the vine, in the way that my sister and I, in our staid black dress, thrown together last minute on my part, for who could expect such sudden sadness? Knees drawn close, we whispered how we loved him, build bubbles of memory to sip up like cheap champagne, get drunk on eulogies and vomit in our shoes. What if I told you I brought with me clouds of silence? A bunch of balloons, black would be appropriate, and inside each one of them, as if it were a present, are all the things about you that we pretend to forget. I think I mean death in the way that we celebrate life. And now, we're going to hear from Nathan Joe, and we're just going to introduce ourselves after everybody performs, because that's kind of what I had planned. So, here's Nathan.
So I'm just performing?
Yeah, you're just performing.
Well, this is fair. Right here. I'm super prepared, as you can see. I didn't write this just before this happened. 6 times I covered myself in snakes on purpose. It's year 13, and the high school musical this year is called Thoroughly Modern Millie. It's really exciting because it's like the only musical with like Asian leads. At this point in my school education, I had denounced drama because I just wasn't very good at it, and it just made me very insecure. But in year 13, even though I wasn't doing drama, I saw that they were casting this, and I thought, are they signalling me? Because there aren't that many Asian kids in our school that are going to want to do drama. Is this like an awkward way of saying, we want to be more inclusive and we want you back, I don't know what was going on. So I auditioned, and that was awkward because I had never sung on command before. I realized that as I was doing it. I was like, I'm singing for a person, like for their approval. This is weird. And that was terrifying because I can't hold a note. But luckily, I found out that that's not what they wanted. They just want someone who looks like an Asian. Number 2. Oh, this is an idea that I had, and now it feels very uncomfortable. Second time I covered myself in snakes, I guess. I'm from Christchurch, so I didn't have that many queer friends growing up, but I did have Google. And so Google told me that there was a queer youth group in my city. And I don't know if you've ever been a young queer person who's tried to make friends by going to queer youth groups before, but let me tell you, it's awkward. So I told my parents I was going to the library to study, which is only half a lie. And then I went to the location, the home base of Qtopia in Christchurch, and I basically paced back and forth like on the opposite side of the road for like 10 minutes before I walked in. And yeah, went back maybe 2 or 3 more times, but hey, I overcame that and I went in. Yeah. Number 3. The first time I arranged to meet someone from the internet, I'm filled with like this yucky anticipation. Like on one level, I was kind of like, oh my God, what could happen? Could I fall in love? I didn't fall in love, guys. I was like, will he look like his photo? He didn't look like his photo. Are we gonna make love? We didn't make love. And is catfishing actually a thing? Catfishing is a thing. Number 3. No, number 4. After uni, broadcasting school, I got an internship in Auckland. My dad offered to drive me up from Christchurch to Auckland, which was really nice of him, so we got to bond. I decided this was the time to come out. And I couldn't do it until the last 5 minutes of the car ride, so honestly, it felt like a really long car ride, guys. Like, honestly. And he was like, why are you so quiet? And I was like, 'cause I'm gay! Number 5. This is kind of a depressing one. Breaking up with my boyfriend of 5 years, that was really scary. I got to the point where I realized that I learnt that nothing kills love faster than pity. And at that point, 5 years in, I pitied him more than I loved him. And all I could think about was, God, this breakup is going to be really hard. The rent is so expensive. In Auckland. 6. When I first thought about quitting my job this year and moving back to Christchurch, I really ummed and ahed, and it was a huge ordeal because my whole life has been in Auckland really the past 6-7 years. And I kind of got to the point in February where it's like, shit, I've quit my job now, I can't unquit. I've trained someone else. I've signed up to do a course in Christchurch. I've said goodbye to enough people that it'd be awkward. But it was good because I got to a point where I was I was standing on the edge of the cliff, the horizon of, I don't know, of fear and possibilities in the universe, and I remembered that I have been in this spot before, and I've been in the spot 6 times before, according to this list, and I'm still okay and actually stronger than ever. So, yeah, that's my little list. Thank you.
We actually went to high school together, just to draw some connections for you there. So what I've got are 3 shorter poems. Lately I've been doing a lot of work with dissociation and amnesia and kind of trying to write about that. So this is sort of an exercise in whether I can actually read in italics in different fonts, because I didn't think this through. But here we go. This one's called homophony. In the absence of a single crucial vitamin, a single crucial connective protein will begin to break down, will be unable to replace itself, will go unreplaced by you, the landlord, or anyone else, and will eventually fail. This protein, collagen, makes up 30% of your body. One of those numbers at once a majority and not, depending on how you choose to present things. And ultimately, your scars will all fall open. This is a scientific fact. And like all scientific facts, it is extremely comfortable when you're staring down a sink full of your own teeth and hair. You knew, and yet here we are. Did you want something? It looks like seaweed, like fish. You have a good eye, it looks like hair and like teeth. How long has the sink been chipped? I didn't know I even had this much hair. There's something else to see in front of you. You never see anything. This is my life, not my art. It's not the same. It's the same. Don't threaten me. You need things you can't make from nothing. You'll see. This is your life, not your art. This one's called Table Tennis. I can't concentrate long enough to think about the fact that I can't think. I feel everything at once. I got my foot caught in a rabbit hole walking through Cromwell after, you shouldn't have done that. You drink too much. There were photos of his parents and his sister all through the house. When we arrived, late, there were hearts in the oven, one each, stuffed with breadcrumbs, wrapped in foil. And it's these images that make me concerned I'm doing it all to serve a personal narrative. We went hunting, 5 of us, and caught nothing, and ate takeaways on the floor of the lounge instead. There were caves in the hills. James and I climbed the rickety tower above the vineyard and took photos of the others waiting on the ground. This is out of order. Time passes in globs and strings, like mold or menstrual blood. I've given up taking it personally. How can the world be at once so loud and so yawning quiet? The trail of breadcrumbs is non-existent, so maybe I'm doing some part of this wrong. I don't know if this is the right story for summer wine country. The boys caught the sun while we wandered through the grapevines with the rabbit guns and then through the hills with the other things. And this happened some time ago, but it seems to me that the whole century has burning on its mind. Up central, you could smell it on the wind coming off the lakes and the glaciers. I'm fairly sure this was all some time ago now. Last one, this is called Fractal. The pursuit is best when it never confuses itself with the animal. The reason for the stretching tension is as much a part of the story as your tattoos, your front teeth. The art justifies that I don't let myself touch you. My fear coalesced into a tire iron. One man standing, cradling another's feet. An airport. Really, there's a part of the courtship narrative that just becomes unrelatable if it's pleasant. Who can relate? That can I. I love you like a memory. Infinite softness, the way a cloud is sharp and cold, all your edges backlit. You're always suffused in light in my head. I love you like a beginning, like someone who hasn't disappointed me yet. I hold a petrified little fetish for the can't, for the stories where this all ends in duality rather than separation. In brief, I love you most ardently, and I only called you what I did because I didn't know what else to say, and if it's true, then oh my God, where were you 10 years ago? I needed you. How dare you show up now with your smile? You're not doing it right. You're making me look bad. You're making me look confused. You're making me confused. 2 years over. With so little trace, how dare you walk away from me now with your smile? Tell me you've been reading all the wrong stories. Tell me words exist to change this. Exterior, day, airfield. Jack's police car appears in the distance as the biplane taxis away. And whatever happens next, you have 3 lines to do it in.
Hello everybody, I don't have a piece of paper to read from. We'll pretend that's because of sustainability reasons, but it's actually because I'm afraid of printers. We have a very unhealthy relationship. I won't introduce myself as per the given instructions, but I will disclose that I am a medical student, and these 3 poems that I'm going to read are kind of about my journey throughout medical school, as I'm set to graduate in about a month's time, which is also very terrifying. So this first poem was written kind of in the first year of clinical medicine. It's called August 2017. More than once we put on our coats and visit the winter gardens to look at the flowers, their stems craning toward light, weighed down by clusters of star-like things only. Soon we will be summoned back to the hospital to learn new voices and the art of talking to people with eggshell skin. Sometimes they crack and leave pieces of themselves in places the cleaners can't reach. But here in the gardens, there are no smells of faded optimism, no sheaves of matted hair, no widows crying because their rings were stolen and all they have are 2 carrot tablets they must swallow 4 times a day. There is hope, of course. What else would tether so many people to a place like this? But happiness is not for everybody. In the half clutches of sleep, people toss and turn, dreaming they will be the ones who survive the stairs to hell and back, powered by toast and tea and desire. Thank you. That was a poem that was published in an edition of Signals, a young writer's literary journal. This next poem is called 13 Ways of Looking at a Patient. 1. The view from where they once stood seems obsolete now, like a stone carving whose meaning was last known millennia ago. 2. I held your leg as the surgeon amputated it, like the limb of a kauri that I carry with me up mountains. 3. The patient smiles for the parochial snapshots. They will be filed away for nobody to read between the lines. 4. You tell me your husband died suddenly and left you his bitch of a cat. You tell me before the year is out, you'll turn it into a hat. 5. I do not know which to prefer, the patient who offers their veins in atonement or the patient who asks for somebody else, the dress rehearsal or the undressing. 6. With news broken like a dawn, she sits by the window, the rain of surrender hitting the pain again and again like a song that never quite hits home. 7. O thin men of Hippocrates, how would you respond to the golden rust of resistance when it rides the wind so freely and fells those to whom you tend? 8. Struck by the sound of distant disdain, struck by this modern retelling in which she is cast as harridan and saboteur, the patient lets the white waves pull her under. 9. When a patient performs the vanishing act, winter lodges itself in the audience's eyes. 10. A flock of patients, perched in trepidation and silence, worries you less when printed in black and white as a list in your pocket. 11. Sometimes knowing fills your hands with a bitterness you don't have the heart to handle. Sometimes all you give them are your hands, and in them the pieces of what they know. 12. I watch you, watch me, watch you. I am new to this, too. 13. Morning shuffled out of the room, and let evening take over. Curtains closed around her like a winter coat. The patient sat out of view in the hospital bed. I do like medicine, I promise, even though the poems don't make it seem like it. And this final piece is called Bad News Breaking, because unfortunately one of the things that doctors have to do in the hospital is break bad news. Bad news breaking. The rehearsed phrase lingers in the room. It sweats. Then, yawning, it arches its back before inserting itself in the way only rehearsed phrases can between 2 curated sentences which are gleaming by the window. The sentences have been polished. Their obsidian forms have been brought to a shine. For the viewer, for those who will hear the viewer's recount of this day when a strained translation informed them that the unambiguous hieroglyphs in their hands would not spell out a happy ending, whichever way you looked, however hard you held them up to the light. Thank you.
Kia ora, and in keeping with the theme, I'll give a no-context poem, and then we'll kick off some introductions about who these people are on the stage, sharing this amazing work. Before I do this poem, just a quick show of hands. Who here likes going shopping and like finding bargains on like homeware and kitchenware, like Kmart, Briscoe's, places like that? Who's a bargain hunter in here? A few people, okay. Just one more question. Who here sometimes gets scared that death comes for us all? A few more hands, okay. If you answered yes to either of those, this poem's for you. It's called Tammy the Briscoe's Lady Plans My Funeral. Tammy the Briscoe's lady plans my funeral. Wearing withered garlands, black lace gown, heavy eyeshadow, she's ready. A crowd of underpaid checkout assistants in desperate need of collective action bang reasonably priced pots and pans together. I evaporate through the ceiling fan. Buy my coffin at Briscoe's, Tammy. Use what you can first. Donate my kidneys to kitchen appliances so everyone can see the NutriBullet 600 really is the original nutrient extractor. Put my lungs on a display mattress, Tammy. Let couples rest their heads briefly. Pretend this is what their relationship needs, when we all know what it needs is a rethinking of its normative monogamous foundation and a non-shamey discussion about consensual choking and pegging. Take my teeth out first, Tammy. Forge the enamel into a ceremonial dinner plate to pair with carved tibia cutlery. Peel back my skin, mince it into pulp, make biodegradable circulars, then stick me in every letterbox marked no circulars. I'm a marketing genius, Tammy. Let my dying act be your green tick certification, your corporate carbon credit tax write-off. That's it, Tammy. Tell me I'm less than the sum of my parts. I've been a bad, bad sack of biological possibilities. No one ever really gets to pick their own coffin. Except me, obviously. Because this isn't a poem. It's a legally binding contract. All the best lawyers are dead, and they're waiting patiently in hell for a case just like this. If you buy my coffin from somewhere that doesn't keep batteries next to prostate cancer fundraising chocolate, or have a 10-day Christmas extravaganza, I'll see you in court. I'm okay with being scared every day until it happens. It comes for us all, Tammy. Loitering ethereally in the bedding section, haunting Egyptian cotton sheet sets, decent thread count, $19.99 plus GST, offer ends Sunday, T's and C's apply. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I need a moment. I fucking love that poem so much. Ooh. Okay, let's get into
Who are
it.
you? Tell us who you are.
Who the fuck am I? You rude
I wanna
fucking
know.
piece
I wanna
of
know.
shit.
Yeah.
Okay, actually though, what the question seriously is not only who am I, but how did I get here? Yes. And what am I doing? So, 3-part answer. One, my name is Eliana Gray, and 2, I'm a writer, mainly poetry, and used to be also music, actually. That's not a lie. But I guess like a brief overview, if we're going to do like the Cliff Notes version of like what I'm doing with writing and how that happened, I guess highlights. I released a book this year. First one is cool. You can buy it if you want to. You come see me afterwards. Plug. It's not Spawn, except Spawn myself. SpawnCon? I don't know. And then next, I just got my first residency. I'm going to go to Finland next year. I guess the most important things about me as like a poet is that I write like primarily about super sad shit, like how I'm a survivor of sexual abuse and how that like is really difficult. And I have like complex PTSD and that's also super hard. And then I write a lot about like suicide and like feeling like killing myself. I write a lot about anxiety. Yeah, but like with humor. So it's super funny. And it, like easy to swallow for people who are non-neurodivergent. And also obviously about how I wish my parents were dead. And the way that I got there was just through relentless anxiety and stumbling. But mostly I need to give most credit to the only like formal training I've ever done was Emma Neal's poetry course at Otago University. And that was the turning point for me from just like writing poems to like try to make money off them, which I don't know if you've ever tried doing that, but it's like super hard. And that's where I'm at. And then now I'm running an event at a writers' festival for the first time, and I'm fucking terrified. What are you scared of, Nathan, and who are you?
Snuck up on me. Very... what am I afraid of first? Are we going reverse chronological fear to... what am I afraid of? Just, honestly, I'm afraid of finally caving in and going back to work. I'm afraid that money will matter enough again. Like, that's like a big thing for me because I kind of got to the point where I was okay with it not mattering so much, but then it's, now that my credit card is bigger and I've gotten through to like almost the end of the year, I've really felt the interest, I guess, is the term for it. But yeah, that's terrifying because I think I will probably have to go back to work at some point, but I hope when I do, I know that I can leave, I guess. I am Nathan Joe. I'm also the writer in residence for the New Zealand Young Writers Festival at the moment, and I wrap up tomorrow. Woo! My medium of choice is theatre/playwriting. I like drama and theatre form. I like live art, live performance. I'm predominantly as the writer, but I've done a bit of sort of stuff that might be considered acting, more like performing as myself. I just got into spoken word last year as well, which I'm really enjoying.
And what did you win last night?
I won the Otago Poetry Slam last night.
Damn right you
was
did.
cool.
Yeah.
I studied broadcasting in Christchurch. I wanted to become like, when I was a teenage boy, I thought I wanted to be Quentin Tarantino, but gayer and more Asian. Now I want to be like gay Asian Fleabag. So we all go through like a journey, Like that's my journey. I went to Auckland, did my internship there, realized doing an internship for a TV company doesn't make you a filmmaker. That was fun. I did do a lot of driving in the car that they gave me, and that was awful because I had never driven in Auckland before. And wow, that was scary. That's improvised. That was terrifying. Honestly, driving in the CBD in Auckland when you've never driven in Auckland before. That should be they should redo Fear Factor, and that's every episode. Joe Rogan forcing you to drive in Auckland.
I'd watch that.
I would watch that as well. And then Playmarket have they've got a lot of cool programs, but Playmarket's sort of the playwriting agency client thing representative of New Zealand, and they had a thing called Asian Ink, and I was like, I'm Asian, I can work with ink. So I wrote my first play that got developed through that. I kind of liked the process. It was a bit confusing because I'd not been involved in a theatre workshop before, but sort of from that point onwards, I was like, you know what, maybe playwriting is a bit more, I don't know, there's room as a playwright to do that and actually be somewhat prolific and learn when you don't have the infrastructure to support you. And here I am, talking on a microphone about how much I don't like driving in Auckland.
Kia ora, my name's Kerry. How did I get here? I walked here. I write mostly for stage and screen. I run a queer cabaret narrative theatre burlesque fusion company. It's the only one in Dunedin, believe it or not.
And the best.
Yeah, it's the best. So we do 3 sort of full-length narrative shows every year. That's pretty cool. In terms of poetry, I'm currently working on... I've been getting really into post-structuralism because I'm insufferable as a person. And so I'm kind of working on a collection of poetry and short writing and visual art that's about... It's kind of a real-time log of recovering memory loss to traumatic amnesia. So super light, but I think it's quite interesting. I'm really enjoying it. What am I afraid of? I can't really talk to girls when I'm sober, so we'll go with that.
Hi everyone, my name's Maria. I'm one of the Starling micro-residency writers, and that's why I'm in Dunedin. Shout out to Ella, who is also one of the micro-residency writers and in the audience. Oh, Zoe! Hi! Full crowd. I'm originally from Auckland, and I can tell you that driving in Auckland is not scary if you are the scariest person on the road. Self-proclaimed terrible driver, sorry. I started writing in high school because I had the immense privilege of going to a high school where they had a writing for publication program as an alternative to English. Yeah, it was pretty great. It was pretty great. And so I just started kind of writing terrible teenage love poems, and we've all been there. And just gradually submitting to journals, and even though I didn't pursue creative writing professionally, I did it semi-professionally. I'm doing freelance writing and just kind of building up my portfolio and continuously submitting to journals and being rejected. It's great. The only thing better for learning to develop resilience against rejection than Tinder is probably pursuing a writing career. Yeah, and so I've just been freelance writing for the last several years, and kind of via that journey have ended up here, having the immense privilege of writing in DPAG. Did I say that right? Yeah, almost. No. No, you didn't. Yeah. Sorry, what was the last question?
What are you super afraid of, like tonight or in general?
Oh, in general. Many fears. Print is one of them. I think one of my biggest fears is that I will spend my life waiting for someone else to do the incredibly cool thing that I really want to be doing, and so a large part of kind of living my day-to-day is trying to take kind of baby steps to ensure that, you know, you're chasing the dream. Aww. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, that's inspirational stuff. Yeah.
Hope you all got something out of this.
Inspirational stuff. Give her a round of applause. That's awesome. I'm Jordan, as I've already said, co-host of this with Eliana. I'm from Timaru initially. Tim is hard. There's a few Timaruvians in the crowd. That's cool. I'm a poet, I should say that. I started writing, I guess, in high school. I sort of got into poetry. And then I think the first poet I ever read who I loved was James K. Baxter, who has since been cancelled and turns out as a monster.
Yeah.
All of your faves are problematic. But anyway, I dabbled a wee bit and I just wrote some awful poetry, and then went to uni and did an English degree, but didn't really kind of pursue the writing. I wrote a bit, but sort of put it on the back burner and just kind of went with my fallback option and became a lawyer, as you do. And then sort of came back to it a couple of years ago, sort of fell back in love with it, started like finally reading a lot of New Zealand poetry and realising that there's this amazing community of writers, many of whom are here today, that I had just had no idea about. And it was like sort of the wool had been pulled from my eyes. So I'm like, okay, falling in love with poetry again. This is incredible. There's some incredible stuff happening. Started writing again. A friend of mine who runs a music festival, Bush Bash in Wellington, gave me a chance to read some poems. He decided to put poetry in the music festival, which is cool. I think poetry and music should be together more, because you know it's like the eating your vegetables of the arts. Like no one likes poetry, but like it's good for you, and you should do it. Like yeah. And so he got Hera Lindsay Bird to come and perform some poems, and he's like, do you want to read some as well? I'm like, oh my God, yes, absolutely. And I was shit scared, and I did it in this beautiful forest, and there's about 100 people there, and it was horrifying, but I also fell in love with it, and it was just, I had such a good response, and the feeling was great, and just like, yeah, that kind of feeling of community. So I decided to like kind of try and do some more of that, and I signed up to a poetry slam in Wellington, and then ended up becoming the New Zealand Poetry Slam champion last year.
Yeah, boy. Wait, and where did you just fly back from?
I just flew back. So on Thursday, I got back from the USA, where I competed at the World Poetry Slam Championships, which was super fun. I didn't win, but that's cool. I had a good time. It's all right. You know what? Fuck those guys. So I last night, I sort of helped organise the slam, which Nathan fucking smashed and did amazing at. And I did a poem to kind of shut out the night and talk about fears. It was a poem about sort of wanking and being a teenager. And my entire family was here. Like my mum, my dad, my sisters, my cousins, they were all here watching me do this poem about sort of being a teenage boy, like getting like viruses from porn and stuff. And yeah, so that was stressful for me. And the poem went down really well. And then I tried that poem in America because every time I do it in New Zealand, it goes down really well. They hated it. Oh my God, they hated it so much. It was the first poem I did, and it went down like a cup of cold sick, and I was like, oh, this is going to be a long weekend. But no, things improved after that, and I had an amazing time. I met some of the most amazing poets in the world, and I was one of 3 poets. It was mainly American poets, so I was one of 3 poets from other countries, and so even though I didn't make the finals, I got the chance to go up on the final stage, and I performed a poem about depression and suicide in New Zealand, and how it's kind of one of our dirty little secrets in this country, and just had an amazing response to that, and it was like one of the most validating and also scary things in the world. So that was incredible. And in terms of what scares me, everything. Like, someone once told me my poems are 50% anxiety and 50% dick jokes, and I think that's kind of accurate. And I was looking through my poems to decide what would fit for this, and I realized they all did, in a way. Like, it's fears of something, whether it's fear of death, fear of climate change, fear of becoming what I can see, what I can see in my family in the future, fear of a lot of things, and that essentially my writing is kind of exploring that fear in a way that's maybe kind of using levity or using sort of unusual perspectives and kind of trying to dissect that, because I can't do it properly. So if I write it on the page, then I can pretend that I'm actually dealing with these problems by putting them out there, but I'm not actually dealing with them. And so that's kind of been my journey, I guess. And now I'm here, and this is so cool, and I never thought I would get to do events like this with amazing people like this, and just kind of be this involved in this community. And I'm just real excited to be here, and that's cool.
Yeah, Jordan! Okay, friends, this is the real shit. This is the serious part of the evening. And I've got a question that I would like to direct to all of you. You're not allowed to answer at the same time. You have to answer one after the other. And I think so far this evening we've talked a lot about how fear can operate in what's sort of seen as a negative way, like what it can deter us from doing and how it can be a barrier to access and how it can hold us back. But what I kind of want to ask is, are there ways in your life that fear acts in a way that you would see a positive benefit? Does it ever act for you as a motivator? Is there a balance between that you need to strike? Or how do you feel about that as a concept?
Alrighty then. Guess we're going clockwise.
Totally. I'm sorry about that.
That's all right. I forgive you. You are forgiven. It's a Christian concept, and there you go. Oh no. I'm afraid that was going to happen. From like a writing perspective, there's an Korean-American playwright called Young Jean Lee, and every time she's given up playwriting now and decided to go into screen, but when she was playwriting, every time she enters a new topic or subject or project, her sort of self-provocation is, what am I most afraid of to write? And then she will write it. And I find that quite exciting. I like the idea of setting obstructions and obstacles for yourself as an artist and then going, how can I make this fun? Like, how can something I, in theory, would never want to do or in theory hate become liberating? And how can I subvert my own expectations of what that is? Because why do I hate that? Like, if someone is like, write a family drama, I'd be like, oh no, I don't want to deal with that baggage. Obviously, that it's a signal that there's something there that I need to address, either from like a personal level or from like a artistic level. In the same way, I think like one of my first plays I ever wrote was like a Greek tragedy, because I was like, oh, that's kind of a weird, outdated form, and it was kind of fun wrangling with that. Yeah, so I think fear can tell us that there is something there for a reason, and maybe there's something to be kind of addressed or fixed.
You sound just like my therapist.
Oh my god, do I look like him or her?
This is a therapy session. This is why we're here.
That's good.
But like a nice energy.
Oh.
Yeah.
Before I answer this question, I'm going to forget if I don't say it now, so I want you to know that there's a word in Swedish for crying and masturbating at the same
Oh
time.
my God, please tell me.
Gratrunka?
Sorry?
Gratrunka?
That's the name of my first book, thank
It
you.
almost sounds automatic. It almost sounds onomatopoeic, you know? Like,
Does it? Really?
like you fall over.
But to return to the question, I think fear is a really, really good barometer for what's important to you. I think that's something we often tell sort of new actors and new performers, like when they're really scared to go on stage. It's like, if you're nervous, that's good because it means you care, right? So the things that you're sort of most afraid of screwing up or of doing wrong, that's probably because they really matter to you. Kind of like on the flip side, I think fear is also something that I am still learning to listen to as a kind of buried bits of my brain telling me to be a bit more careful about something than I possibly am, which I think has been really valuable. So it's not so much a like, don't go here at all, just to like, here be dragons, go slow, figure out what you're doing. Obviously it matters, so give it the respect it deserves,
Yes. You also sound like a therapist. Yeah. It's a group therapy session.
I think, so I mentioned I started off writing poetry as a teen, and I kind of have dabbled.
Either way is fine. We'll accept both.
In various kind of forms and things throughout kind of university. And one of the things I've been getting into recently is essay writing. And something I found in essay writing is, when you're writing about matters of inequality or exploring areas where there are groups of people who experience a lot of oppression, and you're writing kind of in an attempt to advocate or kind of empower, there's this kind of fear of failure that kind of permeates your every kind of crippling moment in front of the blank screen. But I find that actually that fear can be really useful because it really pushes you to take, your research and your writing and your craft to, as far as you can possibly take it, because it matters, and it's not just a responsibility to yourself, it's you have this kind of responsibility to others that is kind of wrapped up in the writing process. So I think, I think fear can be a really good thing. The other not so great fear that I have had in my writing is a fear of being judged. And the problem with writing, when you're writing about issues like inequality and things, is that there's always a camp that will tell you you're wrong. So inevitably, in writing the thing that you're writing, you just have to face judgment. But I think something that my mentors have told me is that as long as you are very sure that you are doing something with integrity and good intention, even if you make a mistake in the process, largely people will support you as long as you're communicating, and if you do make a mistake, to apologise sincerely for it.
Okay.
I think that fear of being judged is really interesting, and it brings to mind sort of the bigger question of, obviously, like, there's a sort of theme of confronting fear in all of your work, and you're all young writers and you've all achieved a lot in this sort of short time on this earth, and how the sort of the external fears, how do they play into your work? So not necessarily in your work itself, but within the career and sort of your pursuits, sort of external of the actual work, sort of what are you scared of? What do you think about? Yeah, that's a big one. Here you go. Tell us about it.
I'm scared that no one will ever pay me for doing this.
Outside of money, what else?
Actually, going back to something Jordan mentioned is about your parents watching you do the masturbation thing.
Please frame that better, Nathan.
The poem. My sister has, but my parents have never seen any of my work. And actually, that is quite I guess I'm sad, but I'm mostly quite relieved because my work kind of deals with stuff that they don't really understand about me or have a conception of. Like, they know that I'm queer, but I don't think they really understand what my queerness means within my space versus like their idea of being gay. And not limited to that, like issues of sexuality in a kind of larger context, and language I use, and issues I deal with, and issues of race I deal with. I'm not sure they'd really like what I say, to be honest. They'd be like, chill out, don't be so rowdy, just fit in, to be honest. And if I knew they were going to be part of the audience for all of my plays henceforward, I probably would write quite differently. And that's quite frightening, to know that that's all it would take for me to not be true to myself. Yeah.
What about you, Ali?
I'm just gonna second what Nathan. Oh, look at our wires. Yes.
I'm just going to kind of second what Nathan said. I find that probably one of the biggest external influences on my writing is censorship-based self-censorship based out of fear. And speaking of which, I've totally just realized that we're podcasting this, and I was like, I can read the poem about my parents because they'll never hear it, but now I can never post it online. And anyone in the audience who knows my parents can't either, sorry. But yeah, so I guess for me, just any, because my parents don't know, my parents know that I'm a survivor, and I think they know I'm non-binary, but I don't actually know. We haven't had enough of a conversation about it. So there's just various vague things about me. That's pretty much all I write about, which is just wanting to kill myself, being queer, and having experienced lots of abuse. And obviously, I haven't talked in depth with them about all of that because that's scary. But also, I think that a way that fear operates, not only for me, but for them, is that that's scary for them, for me to be writing about it, because I think that's an interesting way, actually, that fear operates. Just to totally go on a tangent, sometimes I think about the way that my poems affect other people, because my content is myself. So then, I never intentionally censor myself because of that, but I am aware of the fact that because I'm writing about such horrible things that happened to me, that makes my family feel really shitty too, because they don't want bad things to have happened to me. And, they want to understand me, and they don't want to feel bad for, not getting my queerness or not being able to support me in the right way. And so I think that's an interesting way that fear kind of flows both ways. Yeah.
Sort of through your writing, it creates sort of a responsibility on their part, and it's sort of, that wasn't there before, or?
1 second.
Yeah.
I think it creates different spaces in which the work can live. So, for example, there's, my book that I wrote. Not Spawn.
Buy her book.
Not Spawn. No, but so the book's basically very explicitly about just experiences of sexual abuse. And so, for example, some of my family members just straight up are never gonna read it, and we've talked about that, and that's totally amazing, because they should protect themselves, and there's no reason that they need to read it, even if it wasn't about that, but also especially because if it's gonna hurt them, I mean, that's a whole other conversation. But I think that one thing that it does is that it creates different spaces for the work. Some of my more queer poems I don't share on Facebook, because that's the only social media that my parents go on, but I'm way gayer on Twitter.
That's a great quote. I really like that.
Twitter.
That's a great quote.
In terms of poetry, I publish pretty much exclusively under a pseudonym. Yeah. Because I can't. The first thing I ever sort of published with any kind of broadness has a bit in it about when I first told my parents that I wanted to seek psychiatric help, and my mother told me that it was super normal to be suicidal at university, which is not, by the way. But I think she has grown a lot since then, and our relationship has grown a lot since then, and I think bringing that back is not something that I want to do to her, and it's not something I want to do to a relationship that we've both worked really, really hard at in the last 5-10 years, sort of to fix a lot of damage that was maybe done when I was a teenager. I'm a deeply private person, and believe it or not, as a writer, but that's kind of why I have that. It's this bit that I can sort of sequester off. And people will only actually connect it to me if I tell them that it's me, because I guess a lot of my writing is sort of fairly abstract. I'm not sure, unless people knew me really, really well, that they would actually realize that it was mine. I'm inscrutable. No one can scrut me. But yeah, that's just, I guess, kind of answer to your questions. I just straight up don't deal with it. Nah, wall.
No, you do deal with it by creating your own boundaries.
Yeah, it's a fairly
it's a hard
brick wall boundary. Yeah.
I probably should write more poetry under a pseudonym. Um, I think one of the kind of external fear things that influence my work, or kind of the work I don't end up writing, is when I'm kind of afraid that I'm not the best qualified person to write about the subject. So I often find myself either being asked or invited to write about a lot of areas where I just don't come from that background, or I'm an ally and not really from the community. And there's always that question of, you know, somebody should be talking about these issues, but who is the best person? And, you know, sometimes you can write the angle of the piece in a way that is supportive and not taking over the space. But I think that is something that I kind of am a bit, you know, apprehensive about navigating, because I don't, you know, want to, I don't want to dominate a platform where someone else should be on the stage.
Mm.
Yeah.
You're providing great segues. This is excellent. Your answers are so great. Just picking up on that point. Have you found sort of within the communities, like community is obviously a very positive thing, and like especially in New Zealand where the Aotearoa arts and literary community is tight, but have you found sort of having these expectations or frameworks maybe sort of forced upon you, or sort of been seen through a lens that you weren't expecting, and has that sort of provided any barriers as you sort of talked about, or issues, anything?
Yeah, like, I guess from like coming from a healthcare student background, I'm often kind of asked to explore ideas about kind of inequalities, whether that's for Māori patients, for transgender patients, and those are kind of areas that I've done projects in the past, and I find it quite difficult navigating that space because obviously that's not my background, but then there's also like a really pressing need for some of the stories and voices in that space to kind of be shared more widely. Yeah. And I think it's kind of a learning process as a young writer who doesn't really have any formal educational training in writing to kind of go ahead and try go and progress through that kind of experience with minimal mentoring.
Yeah, I think kind of a similar thing with my narrative fusion cabaret company thing. Basically, I'm the only writer for that company. No one else really has much of an interest in it. We've got a lot of people who are performers. I'm just kind of the only one who actually does it. A lot of our performers are Māori and Pacifica, and a lot of them want their characters to be Māori and Pacifica, which terrifies me. And I kind of like navigating that with respect and integrity, while still like I am the one who has to make the sort of creative artistic decisions about like the narrative and about the story, because that is literally my job. I'm the writer. I write the stories, and kind of figuring out how to I guess how to ask people the right questions and how to work with people in a way that we get something that everyone is happy with, and also that they I guess that kind of like I am helping you express something that you maybe don't feel comfortable sort of from a technical writing perspective with getting out, that kind of like facilitating thing, but facilitating for wildly different experiences than my own is really, really, really frightening. And especially like I work with my friends. All my performers are like close friends, so if I screw it up, it's really bad. And I have to apologize profusely and then fix it. But that's good. I'm glad I get the opportunity to fix it.
Starting out as a playwright, I sort of actively avoided writing works dealing with Asian themes and issues. I really, really didn't want to be pigeonholed or like thought of as like an Asian writer who writes Asian work. It was something I wouldn't say fought, but actively chose not to do. And that's the funny thing, right? It was like a fear thing. And actually, looking back now, I can go, I was afraid of it because I was dealing at the time probably with a lot of self-loathing and internalized racism. But at the same time, that is a genuine fear. I think if you belong to any sort of demographic or minority especially, you are concerned that you will become known as that niche and never be asked to write anything beyond that, or people will not expect you to write beyond that. and be disappointed in you for writing beyond that, in fact. And that is just like a burden that is so unnecessary to the creative process. But it's something I'm very comfortable with now, I guess, knowing that I'm doing it because I want to do it, not because I'm being forced to. I had an early interview so I won this thing called Before 25, which was like a young playwrights competition, and I tied with another playwright called Cassandra Tay, I'm not sure. Tace? Yeah. And we're both Asian, well, she's Pakeha Asian. And on the Radio New Zealand interview, the interviewer was like, and see, trauma, it's I still remember, even though it was like 6 years ago, was like, oh, isn't it interesting that 2 Asian writers won? And we were like, oh, and like, is it interesting? Because neither of our works were actually to do with Asianness at all. Hers was about grief, and the production that they had of it was all Pakeha cast. Mine was a Greek tragedy with an all Pakeha cast. So it was sort of like, is it interesting? Can we not just be talented? Is that not okay? That we're talented and Asian? Yeah. But yeah, so didn't say that at the time, but there was just sort of like a pause, interview carried on, but that is nestled in my membrane, my consciousness forever. Yeah, oh man.
Jordan, I'm going to throw this back to you. I want to know what your experiences are of external community forces potentially bringing fear into your creative space. Dude.
Sure. I guess for me, it's been a little bit different in the sense that I have the immense privilege of being a cis white man.
That wasn't why I said dude like that, by the way.
Oh, right. I was like, where are they going with this? No.
Oh my God, I'm not shaming you for being a man. Sorry.
Seriously though, so for me, I have this immense privilege where I haven't been subject to these unreasonable expectations that everyone else here is constantly subject to, and I guess for me that sort of permeates in a way of like a constant fear of mine is that I'm taking up space that someone else should have, and that's something you can be as conscious of it as you want, but at the end of the day, I don't know the answer to that, and I probably am. And it's one thing to be mindful of it, and then, it's another thing to actually do that. So I guess, just trying to create spaces for those people who didn't have the fucking leg up that I constantly have, I guess. And it's easy just to get up here and say that as well, I guess, and that's just kind of a thing that I just really want to keep doing and try and do. And I never want to make work that is so self-important or so self-aggrandizing that it's like I am the fucking messiah and I could say this, and because one of the biggest things I've learned from the community is how many fucking talented writers are in New Zealand. Holy shit, it's incredible. Especially young writers, playwrights, poets, musicians, the whole.
I think quick round of applause for that, right?
Yeah, it's incredible. The flip side of it is the community continues to blow me away, and it's given me a place, and it's also given me all of my heroes. All of my favorite writers are young New Zealand writers, without question now, and it gives me sort of a roadmap and things to aspire to, and I think it's just, so yeah, for me it's kind of trying to navigate that space and create that space, but also just being constantly in awe of all these amazing people, and just, yeah, I don't know, I just feel real lucky to be a part of that, and I never want to lose that gratitude, I guess, which I think can probably happen quite easily. Yeah.
That's really nice. I've got a, wait, did you want to say?
I mean, I guess a kind of big fear that's not for me, but a fear I have for others and the future generation of writers and young writers is that New Zealand itself will never respect or appreciate what we have as much as other aspects of the culture that are elevated. Because honestly, I go, no matter how well we do, will there always be a sort of glass ceiling, a proverbial bar that we cannot ascend beyond, because New Zealand as a cultural whole, a homogenous whole, will never give writing its due. Yeah. And I have such concerns about that, because then is what we're doing, not for naught, but never going to get the respect that it deserves. And not even respect, but it's going back to the getting paid thing. It's just I know some
pay your writers.
I know some amazingly talented people in Auckland, and people think they're doing really well, and I'm like, no, she's considering going back to full-time work because she's doing her artistic practice full-time and getting by, and yes, she she got tons of funding to make a web series, to pay herself the amount that she should be paid. And yes, at the end of the year, she'll have no more projects and she won't be exhausted, but she might have to go back to an office job. That's her reality, that no matter how well she does, it's never going to be enough, actually. Mm-hmm. And that sucks.
Yeah, I guess I kind of have a example. Sharing fear of failure, which is a big one for me. But one of the things that I sort of tried to do this year and ended up cutting earlier than I had hoped to was producing a full season of semi-professional theatre with my other company, Little Scorpion, which is like youth-focused kind of experimental theatre. And we got a bit of funding for every show, but one of the fun things about theatre funding in New Zealand is that you can't pay people. There's most of the funds you apply for, you're not allowed to spend it on people, which is obviously really stupid. So we did three shows before I pulled the season, and part of the reason I pulled it was that starting in November, when I started applying for funds, through to July, when I pulled it, I didn't work a single week that was less than 110 hours, because I had to work more than full time on top of it, because I had to keep myself alive. I also had to put money into this to make it happen, because the funding we were given was not enough. And it's just like if people don't do that, I think in Dunedin especially, although it's difficult all around New Zealand, there's this fear, I guess, that if you don't sort of wear yourself to the bone, if you don't burn the candle at both ends, just nothing will happen. The art will go away. Like, if people aren't willing to do it for free and to undersell themselves, they'll just be nothing. And that's terrifying. Like, the idea that if we all just decided to not do it unless we got paid properly, I mean, there wouldn't be anything in Dunedin. There'd be the court maybe in Christchurch, but that's pretty much it for the South Island. Like
in Auckland,
that's really scary.
Wouldn't exist if people didn't do that. Bats probably wouldn't exist. Yeah. So it's a kind of like double-pronged fear of it's really frightening to feel that undervalued and to feel like you're that much kind of living on a knife edge. But it's also frightening to think about what would happen if you stopped doing that, because I'm not actually convinced that anything would sort of flow in to fill that vacuum. Even if we could collectivize and, demand change, I'm not sure that it would happen, which is kind of really sad. It's super scary.
Yeah.
This is amazing. And the reason I smiled when you started talking is because you literally segued into my next question, which was, what are your fears for the wider artistic communities that you're involved in? So high five for being psychic. Yeah, I love you, Nathan. You're amazing. But I want to throw that over to Maria. So what are do you have any fears for the artistic communities that you're involved in, or the artistic communities of Aotearoa as a whole? And if you do, what are they? And if you don't, then that's really awesome, and I'm happy for you.
So I'm not the best person to answer this question, because my primary, in terms of number of hours worked in a week, isn't in the arts. But I'll try my best. I think one of the fears I do have from having worked part-time in the arts, and initially when I started, I spent a lot of time as a volunteer writer, so I spent about 4 to 5 years writing content for free, and it was an amazing experience in that, I was very lucky and did get lots of opportunities, but at the end of the day, it's kind of, you're still part of a very unsustainable model, especially for writers at the very beginning of their careers, because they're kind of expected to do things either for free or for very minimal compensation, and it kind of keeps the engines going, but they're not really remunerated for their hard work, and it is hard work. The amount of hours that goes into most writing and creative projects is insane, and does take a toll on artists' mental health as well, and I think that is an issue, especially if you consider the fact that kind of means that moving forwards, if this kind of climate continues, it's really people coming from more privileged backgrounds that have the kind of luxury of being able to participate in the arts.
Yeah, I think that's what that makes me afraid of. That kind of leads into one of the fears that I have, which is just, I guess, because sometimes it can sort of feel like you're in your own little social bubble. And I'm like, oh yeah, you know, the people that I hang out with, and the art scene's really queer, and you know, like all these assumptions that I make based on the people that I hang out with in my own life. And I think one of the things that I just still find so terrifying on a day-to-day basis is how much work everyone is expected to do, and how deeply undervalued it is, and how much so many different kinds of creative work aren't recognized for what they are. Like, for example, I was thinking about this when I was, decided to go down the amazing rabbit hole of figuring out how much money I was going to make off my book, which is, 50 poems that have, so and the thing that I started really thinking about was like, okay, so I was like, the book's like $25, so that's like 50 cents a poem. Started doing some numbers in my head or whatever, but the thing is that it's like, the time that it takes to write the poems isn't the time that I'm sitting there with the pen and the paper or the fingers and the typing. Like, I've, not to get too personal, but I've been abused a lot. And I've done at least 5 years of therapy and like a lot of personal work and just like a lot of feeling really shitty and living life. And that's all the work that it takes to go into the poems, you know what I mean? And I think that the combination that can so often happen, and so often all the things kind of conflate together and end up exacerbating each other, is that often people who are trying to make money mostly or solely off their art are living off absolutely no money, which, as we know, like increases the prevalence of either having mental health issues or episodes, or like exacerbating pre-existing ones. And then also the fact that we're like constantly mining ourselves for content, I think can be a real drain on mental and spiritual resources. And then the fact that we're like constantly not getting valued, and even the fact that the thing that I think pisses me off the most, and anger and fear are really linked for me, because they both tell me when something's unfair. Again, shout outs to my therapist. But I think the thing that makes me, oh God, I forgot what made me so mad. Can't make me that mad. Fuck. What makes me so mad is that, shit. Fuck. What makes me so mad is that PTSD really affects your short-term memory super bad, and so do both of the psychiatric medications I take. So that makes me fearful of my brain. I can't fucking remember. Okay, I'm gonna hand the microphone to Nathan. No, I can't remember what I'm afraid of. Jordan.
So, pay your artists, everyone. Yeah.
That was it.
Pay your artists. Pay your fucking artists. And yeah, like I'll just quickly sort of riffing on what everyone has said, and it's all the same thing. Is that I'm scared that the art will go away because no one is paying these people who are working their fucking asses off every day, all this sort of unpaid labour. And we're lucky that we have, even though it's barely minimal, few spaces like this where people like this can come together, they can get compensated for their work, they have people who work hard to try and put them in the public. And so, yeah, that's a big fear. But outside of the money thing, because the money thing is sort of the big spectre that looms over everything, the sort of spectre of capitalism, to quote Marx. But outside of that, I guess I have fears in the communities that I operate in. I sort of operate in the poetry space, and like a big thing for me is people are like, oh, you're the slam poet. And I'm like, oh, just poet's fine. But I think one thing for me is sort of there are so few gatekeepers, and access to the public and access to these communities is actually, despite the amazing nature of these communities, is still weirdly limited in a way, I think. And I think for a lot of people whose art may not necessarily fit a particular mould, like say with poetry, maybe they write poetry, maybe they perform, maybe they do it in a visual style, maybe they do all of those things. If you don't fit specific boxes or you don't have these specific criteria, no one gives a fuck. Like, I don't know, there's... Yes, absolutely. You can't get it to the people who give a fuck, which is a slightly different issue. It is, absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's all very interlinked. And I can only speak from the sort of poetry experience, but a big thing, or a sign of success for a poet, is having a book published, which Ali has done. But there are very few publishing houses. The few that are big in New Zealand will only publish from a very select few people. The biggest one in New Zealand will only publish if you've got a fucking master's degree, which is super expensive, so the barriers to access are high.
just like, that makes me mad, which
Yeah.
is like something that I'm fearful about in terms of the arts community is people thinking that you have to be like trained to be a writer, that you have to have an MA from like the IAML or like whatever the fuck, or that you have to, that there's any sort of, yeah. And it's just fucking classist and it's bullshit. Especially because it's like one of the entire things about poetry specifically, which like I'm just gonna get real mad about for a second, is that like it is a new use of language and it is elastic and it is mutable and it is about like poetry is such a beautiful place for people who I think like, you know, can't like traditionally spell or, you know, like weren't good at like English at school or like all these bullshit fucking places that they try and tell us to fit our words into. Because the entire point of poetry is that you're not like doing that or that you're doing literally whatever you want. So yeah. I'm mad about that.
Yeah.
And it makes me fucking fearful. So, like, just read poetry by everybody. Like, if the words move you, it's chill.
Yeah. Yeah, that's all I got on that. That's good. Where do you want to go next?
Where do I want to go next? Well, my next question is, so we've talked about communities, we've talked on a personal level, but I kind of want to know what each of your, to use the word again, personal journey with fear has been. But more specifically, if there was something that you could say to yourself at whatever time point you want, you know, maybe when you first started writing or when you first started seriously considering the arts as something that you wanted to spend more time on, what's something that you would like go back and say to yourself to make yourself less afraid? We don't have to start with you, you know.
I'm so used to it.
Poor
now.
Nathan.
Don't be afraid that people think your characters are you, because they are.
I think everyone's got a few autobiographies in them that you got to kind of get out of your system before you can write anything else. I don't know if I can think of anything that would have made me less afraid, but I wish that I had written more down, even when I have not felt like that was something that would be useful for me to do. I keep a journal, I have for quite a long time now, but I have these gaps of just like a few months. And, you know, like I'll kind of remember vaguely what happened, you know, like I can go back through my diary and see who I was having coffee with or whatever, but I find it quite unsettling having these like big gaps in my record of my life. So that's something I've been kind of really trying to work on, is writing shit down even when I feel like it's maybe not useful or not beautiful. And it's, I guess, specifically kind of a journaling thing rather than a necessarily like writing for publication. Yeah. But yeah, that kind of keeping that flow happening even when I'm not feeling sort of super artistic or super aesthetically pleasing in my suffering.
I think I'm going to talk about when you are trying to submit work to the gatekeepers.
Yes.
I think something I wish my younger self had known is that, firstly, editors have seen work that is way worse than anything you're submitting many, many times. So not to feel too kind of apprehensive about submitting work, because the worst thing that can happen is, you know, the editor's estimations of your creative talent may kind of drop a little bit, but at the end of the day, you just get rejected. There's nothing. Yes, they didn't know who you were, and you just kind of get put in the slush pile or the rejection pile. But you know, you can just try again, and that's one thing that would have kind of, I think, helped me just put my work more out there quite a lot more often. And then the second thing I think is it took a really long time, like several years, before I started pitching ideas and submissions to different publications.
That's scary.
And that is really scary. But again, the worst thing that can happen is you get rejected and you don't have to do the immense amounts of work for not that much pay. So, yeah, and just be really, and if you do actually, you know, make a wild submission and it's kind of a vaguely described but, you know, very ambitious project, and it does get accepted, you then kind of go on this amazing journey where you have to deliver on the then you have the fear to get you, and then, you know, you just really grow as a writer and learn a lot of things about a lot of different things that you might not have known about before.
And then get scared again and start the whole thing again.
Perpetual cycle.
One kind of really practical thing that I've been trying to do this year and I found really, really useful is set yourself a goal for rejections. So like I've just been doing 30 because I've had a lot of other stuff going on this year, but I think it was first proposed in like some essay that got circulated on everywhere, and she's just doing 100 and like just setting yourself the goal of like I am going to get turned down from 100 things this year, and it just kind of like really takes the sting out of it a bit, and it gets you submitting to things that you probably wouldn't have before. And I've kind of, because I'm 3 and I need positive motivations for things, I've got a little there's a specific tattoo that I'm going to get if I can get my 30 for this year. So even if it's something that I really wanted to get published in, and I'm really bummed that they sent me a copy-pasted 2-sentence rejection email, I can still just add another tally mark. I'm 1 tally mark closer to getting my tattoo of Kermit the Frog, So it's okay.
I want to add to that. Oh my god, am I going to go blank again? No, I think something in terms of practical tips that I do with not feeling not going into a deep shame, self-loathing spiral every time I get a rejection is just remembering how fucking subjective poetry is, and the fact that literally all of these journals that you're submitting to, most of the time is just gonna be one person or a couple of their friends reading the poems. And it's sort of if I think about it like that, I'm like, fuck man, there's so much poetry that I don't like. The poetry I really like, and then basically everything else I either think deserves to be murdered or I'm very ambivalent about. So it's if I was to, write a journal, I would reject the shit out of anything that didn't sound like something I'd written probably. And I think that all these, and that's one of the things that makes the whole gatekeeper issue even the more frustrating, is the fact that most of the time here in Aotearoa, the gatekeepers that we have are 5 people who've been there for 100,000 years, and it's that's bad genetic and biodiversity. That's how you kill ecosystems. Oh my god. That's my fear.
The other thing is although sometimes you do get the 2-line rejection letters, sometimes you get really sweet notes from editors. They'll be like, sorry, it's not what we wanted, but nice try.
Just to riff on that, because that hits home in a real way. So I've been... What I wanted to talk about with my younger self is I've been sort of really lucky this year to have found my community and found poets who I can bounce work off and kind of learn from. Ali being one of the biggest, and that is the biggest thing. And I think it's not feeling alone and having people you can go to. You're is this cool? Does this work? Maybe it doesn't. And I never had that growing up, and I never submitted a lot. And then when I was a bit younger and my poetry was a lot worse, I submitted to Starling, which is amazing. I never got in, but I always got really sweet letters being oh, you're so close, but it's just a little shit. But they didn't say that, but that was the vibe, and it was true. I go back and look, I'm oh, it was shit, dang. And now I'm too old to submit. But those kind of things do keep you going, and I've been really lucky this year, and that's some of the gatekeepers hey, their poetry, it's pretty good, it's all right. And that's only through constant rejection, finding a peer group, finding people to help you, realizing you're not alone in that respect, and that you only get better through that. If you don't have that, everyone here has a failed manuscript of bad poems or whatever, a play tucked away that they will burn and set on fire the moment they get to. You can't. It's on the cloud. And Nathan, I'm going to find yours and I'm going to put it everywhere, and it's going to be hilarious.
We're all reading them at the end of this instead of the Q&A.
Yeah, we're going to read them out. God, no, we're not.
I do want to say 2 things on that, though. I remember reading, this is a really bad citation because I can't remember where I read it, so attributed to some genius, but who isn't me, weirdly. But I remember reading one time that poets, and I think this is true for probably all creative people, shouldn't use things submissions being accepted as the gold standard of what's a good poem and what isn't a good poem. And because I've definitely gone through a journey myself with struggling with how much that influences my creative process, because it feels really good when you get accepted into this like journal, and then all of a sudden the gatekeepers have said, you've arrived, and then you're like, ooh, maybe people will like me now, finally. And I think that can sometimes, because there's so many different reasons why poems get picked up for submission. And I just think it would be so sad if I allowed my own writing process and the things that I create to be influenced solely by what poems of mine have gotten accepted for publication, because it would make me a very different writer. And I think that one of the strongest things that I can personally do for myself is to, this sounds so fucking wanky, but like straight up just making shit that I can look back on and feel really proud of, because I'm never gonna make any fucking money out of it anyway, so like I may as well feel super good about doing it. Yeah.
Can I just jump in on that? This is just Jordan and Ellie talk about poetry for half an hour. But just on that point, because you're 100% right, like, even like the framing of the concept of poetry, like the best poems that I've ever heard aren't written on the page. Like poetry can be visual, it can be performative, it can be all of these things, not just like what's submitted in a journal and what's in there. And I think that's a big thing that like spoken word poets, which I just call them poets, most people should just call them that, but like Nathan, you'll find this as you become the next slam champion. But Nathan was so good last night. Anyone who wasn't here, you missed out. Oh my God. Is that there is a stigma, and rightly so, like for sort of spoken word poetry, slam poetry, performance poetry, other types of poetry that aren't lines in a book or whatever. And there's a stigma that there's no prestige to that, there's no value to that, that isn't poetry, it's some other weird thing. And there was an interview, Ben Fagan's gone, but there was an interview a few years ago with a very highly regarded New Zealand poet and professor who I won't name, and the slam poet champion at the time. And he had this quote where it's like, I'm sure like performance poetry happens somewhere out there, but I don't want any part of it, and it's not poetry. And this is like the gatekeeper, and like I hold that in my soul, because like there is no difference. Like,
that's owies.
Huh?
That's owies.
Yeah, right? Yeah. It is, and it's just like, it's, you know, poetry is a lot more elastic than that. It is everything. It's on the page, it's in the mic, it's all of these things. And the sooner we reframe those questions, the sooner we take away power from these people and these journals or these publications. Like, this is what it is. Like, if we have a community shift in the thinking around what poetry is or what theatre is or what art is, then we make that all so much more fluid, and then hopefully someone will pay us and it's fine.
But then also, well, and I think also something that's important about that is that not only do we take control away from these gatekeepers, I love how much shade we're throwing on them today, by the way, it makes me really happy.
Yeah, I was just about to say, you know, like, having said that, like, behind every book, every, you know, journal, it's really a work of art that's been curated by some really hard-working editors out there who we want to send our love to and really deeply.
You should have heard all this shit Maria was talking about publishers earlier. Oh my God,
Like
it was so bad.
Other redacted, it was bad.
Yeah,
really
IIML, I would really love to study with you, so.
Yeah, me too. I might apply at some point. Don't reject me.
Yeah, so it's just kind of really that tension between, like, you know, not wanting to snuff out passion and diversity while, you know, having these obviously like institutions that have the funds and platforms to elevate these voices, and how do we kind of balance those two things? And
how do we create the most supportive and open spaces with the least barriers to access? Yeah. And I think something that is super important in creating that is expanding our idea of what and who has access to written expression, and in what different ways they can do that.
Yeah, and just quickly, just since we've just shadowed on so much, like seeing organisations like the Young Writers Festival, like Starling, who have seen these gaps in the community and these barriers for young writers and given them these opportunities, residency, like publication, a voice, all of these things. And I think that's incredible, and that should not be like completely sort of turned away. Like that they hold a space and they promote this amazing stuff, and I think it has so much value. Yeah.
They provide a really important function.
Yes, and we want to emphasize that.
Most old systems, they could do with a tweak.
Just before we'll have a couple more questions, so just a foreshadow, just to get the audience's mind going. We'll have a Q&A in a minute. It's okay, everyone's leaving, it's fine. No, I'm just kidding. This is a safe space. You're coming back though, right? Yes. So just like think of some questions in your head. They can be fear-related, they can be serious, they can be funny, they can be whatever you want. Maybe you want to know where the best place to get a beer is after this. Whatever it is, it's fine.
There.
Oh yeah. Sorry, this is just a foreshadowing. Yeah.
Just one last sort of thing I wanted to pick up on a word that Marie used, curate. And I think that's a really, really important thing to remember is that curating is an artistic process as well. So any published piece of writing is a collaborative process.
Yeah.
You know, like it's collaborative art.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that as writers we kind of don't really like to admit because we don't like other people touching our things. I know I don't. But I think that kind of shifts, for me personally, it shifts how I think about things like rejection and getting accepted for publication if you're conceptualizing it as something that you're working on together rather than like a thing that is just yours that they are turning down, you know?
I guess when we're talking about gatekeepers, I do think part of the problem with maybe the ones that we criticise, like from their perspective, is they're actually not afraid of enough. They don't live in fear that the industry that they work in is going to collapse, and because they're not afraid, they live in a bubble where they think they can keep doing what they're doing. Whereas organisations like New Zealand Young Writers Festival, I think there's a care and fear that if we don't do things like this, the industry will collapse. And so it actually, like, fear is a really powerful thing and liberating. Like, instill fear into the old guard, guys.
Yeah. But the other thing is that, you know, these institutions, they're obviously, you know, people working in them are driven by passion and a similar shared fear that if they don't kind of curate and hold our submissions to a certain standard, our kind of national, you know, the way that New Zealand literature and poems and performance poetry is held might fall, and that, you know, then that's an equally valid fear.
I think that's where the main sort of tension kind of lies, is that there is multiple different ways that I think, just to talk about poetry specifically, because to me that's my reference point and that's where I see it most prevalently, I think that there is a couple very distinct ways that people think about poetry, and I think especially when we're thinking about it, about people who are actually trying, you know, like in the bigger publishing houses, they are seeing it as like an export as well. And then I think that creates another level of fear, because then it's also becomes about national identity. And like, I mean, I think a big part of like Kiwi identity is like really wanting to be like validated by people overseas. And yeah, I think that's like plays into it as well. Yeah.
All these different agendas, and they're all subjective
Yeah.
in different ways.
Yeah.
But I think like a positive way of looking at rejection sometimes is that sometimes you do submit work that's just objectively a little bit crap.
A lot.
And really, the last thing you want is for really crap work to be published. And being that person...
No one Google me.
So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But I think
That is
also
a real fear. Yeah.
But also as a counterpoint to that, I think it's really important to allow yourself to fucking suck, because I don't think there's any way that you get better, and I think that sometimes a way that fear can act as a big deterrent is that we think we're never good enough to publish. And like, I see this a lot with my friends, you know, they're like, oh, I'm not a real writer, or what I do isn't really poetry, or like, oh, you know, like I've never trained, so like, I can't, you know, I shouldn't be doing this. And I do think that like, as much as sometimes, I mean, we do just all write shit and like it gets published or whatever. And I do think it is really important to allow yourself to write stuff that like you won't like. And that's, I think, actually an amazing sign of growth, because it's like if you're constantly just like loving every single poem you've ever written in your entire life, you probably haven't really like changed that much. And
You're probably a sociopath. Yeah.
And like, I'm personally glad that I'm a very different person than I was when I was a teenager.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Should we throw it out to our sexy audience?
Sexy audience, what up? I've got a mic. We can maybe roam with it. We'll see.
You might have to yell.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions?